The voice that carries your deepest wound rarely sounds wounded. It usually sounds reasonable. It speaks in practical language, offers convincing explanations, and often believes it is protecting you from future pain. That is why so many people spend years obeying it without ever realizing they are listening to an old injury instead of a present reality. A wound does not only remember what happened, it remembers what it concluded. A child who felt unseen may quietly conclude that being noticed must always be earned. Someone who experienced rejection may begin believing that acceptance can disappear without warning. Long after the original moment has passed, the conclusion remains alive, continuing to interpret new experiences through an old expectation. You may notice something interesting when you begin watching this pattern in yourself. The wounded voice rarely asks to be understood. Instead, it asks to be obeyed. It tells you to avoid certain conversations, lower your expectations, work harder, stay smaller, become more agreeable, or constantly prove your value. Every instruction appears practical because its real purpose is to prevent the old pain from happening again. That is why arguing with this voice rarely changes anything. It did not arrive through logic, so it cannot be dismissed by better arguments. It was formed through experience, and experience leaves marks that reasoning alone cannot erase. Until the experience beneath the voice is acknowledged, the voice continues believing its work is unfinished. Many people imagine healing means making this voice disappear. In reality, healing often begins when the voice finally realizes someone is listening. Imagine carrying the same fear for years without anyone recognizing where it came from. If no one ever acknowledged your experience, you would probably keep speaking too. This changes the way you approach yourself. Instead of asking, "How do I stop thinking like this?" you begin asking, "Who inside me still believes this is necessary?" That small change transforms the entire conversation. One question tries to eliminate the voice, while the other becomes curious about the life that produced it. Curiosity creates something that force never can. The moment you become genuinely interested instead of immediately corrective, the wounded part no longer has to fight for your attention. It begins speaking with less urgency because it senses it is finally being heard. The intensity starts changing, not because you defeated it, but because the struggle is no longer required. You can often recognize this in everyday situations. Someone offers gentle feedback, and you hear criticism. A delayed text suddenly feels like abandonment. A friend becomes distracted for a day, and your mind quietly begins preparing for rejection. The present event may be small, yet the emotional reaction feels enormous because two different moments have merged together. Most people believe they are reacting to what is happening now. Often they are reacting to what the present reminds them of. The current situation becomes connected to an older emotional memory before conscious awareness even catches up. By the time your thinking begins explaining your reaction, the wounded voice has already interpreted the event through a history that no one else in the room can see. This is why listening matters more than immediate correction. If you immediately tell yourself that your feelings are irrational, the deeper experience remains untouched. The voice simply learns that it is still alone. It becomes quieter for a moment perhaps, but not because it feels understood. It becomes quieter because it believes speaking is useless. Real listening is different from endlessly revisiting pain. Listening does not require reliving every memory over and over. It means allowing the emotional conclusion to become visible without letting it quietly control your future. There is a difference between living inside an old wound and finally turning toward it with enough presence to understand why it has never stopped calling your name. Something surprising often happens during that process. The voice begins revealing needs instead of fears. Beneath the demand for approval may be the simple desire to feel safe. Beneath constant achievement may be the longing to feel enough without earning it. Beneath perfection may be the hope that if everything is flawless, no one will ever leave again. Once you recognize those deeper needs, the conversation changes again. You stop negotiating with the surface behavior and begin responding to the life underneath it. The wounded voice slowly discovers that it no longer has to disguise itself as productivity, people pleasing, emotional distance, or endless self improvement just to receive attention. Its language becomes softer because its purpose is finally being understood. You may even notice that what once felt like your personality begins revealing itself as adaptation. You always believed you were simply independent, yet perhaps you stopped asking for help because asking once ended in disappointment. You believed you disliked vulnerability, yet perhaps vulnerability simply became associated with being hurt. What looked permanent may have been protective all along. This realization is not an invitation to reject the person you have become. Many of the strengths you carry were developed while surviving difficult seasons. Resilience, awareness, compassion, determination, and sensitivity may all have grown in the same landscape as the wound. Healing is not separating yourself from your history. It is allowing your strengths to remain while slowly releasing the fear that once convinced them they had to carry everything alone. Eventually, there comes a quiet moment when you hear the wounded voice speak, and instead of immediately believing it or fighting it, you simply recognize it. That recognition creates a small space that did not exist before. Within that space, another possibility begins to emerge, not because the wounded voice has disappeared, but because it is no longer the only one being heard. The wounded voice often believes that if you truly understood it, you would be overwhelmed by it. That belief becomes another wound layered over the first one. Instead of speaking honestly, it begins speaking indirectly through anxiety, perfectionism, people pleasing, withdrawal, or constant self criticism. The behavior becomes visible while the original need remains hidden beneath it. This is why listening is not the same as agreeing. You can understand why a wounded voice is afraid without allowing that fear to direct your life. A frightened child may believe every stranger is dangerous, but an adult can appreciate the fear while recognizing that reality has changed. The same relationship begins forming within you when you learn to witness your wounded voice instead of becoming it. You may notice that the wounded voice is constantly searching for certainty. It wants guarantees that no one will leave, that no mistakes will cost love, that every relationship will remain stable, and that every future disappointment can somehow be prevented. Because life cannot provide those guarantees, the voice remains permanently vigilant. It mistakes constant preparation for genuine safety. That vigilance is exhausting because it requires you to predict every possible outcome before allowing yourself to relax. Your nervous system never fully receives permission to rest because somewhere inside, an older version of you is still standing watch. Even joyful experiences become difficult to enjoy because part of your attention is scanning for signs that the joy will soon disappear. Protection quietly replaces participation. Many people assume this means they are simply anxious by nature. Sometimes anxiety is present, but often what you are witnessing is a system that never learned it was allowed to stop guarding the door. Every new relationship, every opportunity, every moment of success is evaluated through the question, is this finally safe? Since absolute certainty never arrives, the guard never leaves its post. This begins revealing something deeper about healing itself. Healing is not convincing the guard that danger never exists. Healing is helping the guard discover that it is no longer standing there alone. Presence changes what certainty never could. Support changes what prediction never could. Think about how differently you move through life when you know someone trustworthy is beside you. The world itself may not become safe overnight, yet your experience of it changes because you are no longer carrying every responsibility by yourself. The wounded voice slowly begins learning the same lesson. It discovers that awareness can replace hypervigilance without abandoning wisdom. That distinction matters because many people fear that healing will make them naive. They worry, what if they soften? they will simply be hurt again. Yet softness is not the absence of discernment. In many cases, it actually sharpens discernment because fear is no longer making every decision. You begin seeing people more clearly because you are no longer viewing them through yesterday's injuries. The voice that once demanded approval also begins changing when it is consistently met with acceptance from within. At first, nothing seems different. It still notices criticism first. It still compares itself to others. It still wonders whether it has done enough. But over time, something subtle shifts because it is no longer starving. Approval and acceptance are often mistaken for one another. Approval depends upon performance. Acceptance depends upon presence. A wounded part that has lived its entire life chasing approval may not immediately recognize acceptance because it has never learned that love can exist before achievement. It keeps working even after the work is no longer necessary. You can sometimes recognize this by paying attention to moments when nothing is required of you. Notice how uncomfortable simple rest can become. Notice how quickly the mind invents another task, another improvement, another responsibility. Productivity may appear to be the goal, but underneath it, another voice may still be asking, "Am I enough if I stop?" That question deserves more compassion than quick correction. It is easy to answer it intellectually while never allowing the answer to become lived experience. Real change begins when your daily life starts giving that wounded voice evidence it has never received before. You rest without earning it. You receive kindness without immediately trying to repay it. You make a mistake without concluding that your worth has changed. These ordinary moments become surprisingly transformative because wounds rarely heal through dramatic revelations alone. They heal through repeated experiences that gently contradict old conclusions. Every time reality unfolds differently than the wound expected, the old story loosens a little more. Trust grows quietly rather than all at once. Eventually, the wounded voice begins speaking with less urgency because it no longer believes every conversation is a fight for survival. It still remembers what happened, but memory is no longer confused with prediction. The past remains part of your story without becoming the author of every new chapter. That is a very different way of carrying your history. You are not trying to erase the version of yourself that once felt abandoned, unseen, or desperate for approval. That version carried you farther than anyone else could have during seasons when you genuinely needed protection. Gratitude naturally replaces resentment because you begin recognizing that many of your defenses were expressions of love, even if they eventually became too heavy to continue carrying. From there, another voice slowly becomes easier to hear. It does not shout because it has nothing to prove. It does not compete because it is not afraid of disappearing. It simply waits with remarkable patience, knowing that every moment spent understanding the wounded voice creates a little more space for a different way of living to begin revealing itself. The deepest change begins when the wounded voice realizes it no longer has to convince you that it exists. For years, it repeated the same fears because repetition was the only way it knew to stay alive in your awareness. Every anxious thought, every familiar insecurity, every recurring emotional pattern carried the same hidden request. Please don't forget what happened to me. Once that request has finally been heard, something remarkable begins to change. The silence that follows can feel unfamiliar. Many people mistake it for emptiness because they have lived so long with internal noise that peace initially feels like the absence of themselves. Yet the absence of constant struggle is not the absence of identity. It is often the first opportunity your deeper nature has ever had to speak without interruption. You may notice this during ordinary moments. You make a mistake without immediately attacking yourself. Someone disagrees with you, yet your entire sense of worth does not collapse around the disagreement. You are overlooked once, and instead of assuming you are invisible, you simply recognize that people sometimes miss things. The external world has not fundamentally changed, yet your relationship to it has become different. This is how healing quietly transforms perception before it transforms circumstances. The same conversation can produce a completely different experience because the interpreter inside you has changed. The wounded voice once translated every uncertainty into danger. Now another presence begins translating uncertainty into possibility. Reality itself feels different because the lens has become different. That new voice does not arrive by defeating the wounded one. It emerges because enough space has finally been created for something that was always present beneath the noise. The healthier voice has always been patient. It never needed to compete because it understood that force cannot produce trust. It simply waited until you became capable of hearing without immediately reacting. Its language is noticeably different. It rarely demands. It rarely rushes. It does not shame you for moving slowly or criticize you for needing time. Instead, it quietly asks questions that create freedom rather than pressure. What do you actually need? What is true right now? What happens if you stop assuming the past is repeating itself? Those questions may sound simple, but they interrupt patterns that have operated for years. The wounded voice survives by supplying immediate answers. The wiser voice often begins with genuine curiosity. Curiosity slows the automatic reaction long enough for awareness to enter. In that pause, new choices become possible. You may even discover that your emotional reactions begin changing before your thinking fully understands why. Situations that once triggered overwhelming fear now create only a brief moment of discomfort. The old pathways still exist, but they no longer carry the same authority. The wound still remembers, yet remembrance no longer automatically becomes direction. This does not mean difficult emotions disappear. Sadness will still visit. Disappointment will still arrive. Loneliness may still appear during certain seasons of life. The difference is that these emotions stop becoming evidence that something is wrong with you. They become experiences moving through you instead of identities settling upon you. Many people spend years trying to become someone who is never heard again. That goal quietly keeps the wounded voice in charge because it assumes safety comes through perfect protection. Life continually reminds us that vulnerability cannot be eliminated without also limiting love, creativity, intimacy, and growth. The very openness that allows pain is also what allows connection. That realization changes the purpose of healing. Healing is no longer about becoming untouchable. It becomes the practice of remaining connected to yourself even when life becomes difficult. If pain arrives, you no longer abandon yourself inside it. If fear appears, you no longer assume fear deserves complete authority. If uncertainty emerges, you no longer mistake uncertainty for danger. The wounded voice slowly begins trusting this new relationship. It notices that difficult emotions are no longer ignored, yet they are also no longer allowed to govern every decision. It experiences something it may never have experienced before: steady companionship. Instead of being silenced or obeyed, it is understood. That understanding gradually dissolves the urgency it once carried. Over time, compassion becomes less of an action and more of a way of seeing yourself. You stop dividing your inner life into acceptable and unacceptable parts. The abandoned child, the unseen child, the approval-seeking child, and the wiser adult all belong to the same human story. None of them need to be erased for wholeness to emerge. They simply need to be placed in a healthier relationship with one another. This changes how you begin seeing other people as well. You recognize that many of the harshest voices you encounter are speaking from places that never truly been heard. You become slower to condemn and quicker to understand, not because every behavior is acceptable, but because you can often recognize the wound beneath the behavior. Compassion becomes clearer without becoming naive. Eventually, there comes a quiet day when you realize the wounded voice has become less of a commander and more of a companion whose history you understand. It still has moments when it becomes frightened. It still remembers old conclusions. But now those moments are met by something larger than fear, something patient enough to listen without surrendering direction. From there, your inner life no longer feels like a battlefield where one voice must destroy another. It begins feeling more like a home where every voice has finally found its proper place. The wounded voice is no longer carrying responsibilities it was never meant to carry. The wiser voice is no longer waiting outside the conversation. And as that relationship continues deepening, you may begin noticing that what first appeared to be the end of healing was actually the beginning of learning how to live from a self that no longer mistakes old pain for present truth.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library. each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.